Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar for this evening, Be Heard, Advocacy with Your MPP. Our guest tonight, and a member, of course, of our community and team as well, is Kim Stevens, Community Champions Network, North American Council of Adoptable Children. Many of you have met her before, and she's going to help us tonight to really focus in on how we do the advocacy that we are planning to do during Adoption Awareness Month this November, where our goal is for adoptive families, members of the adoptive community, to reach out to their local MPPs and talk with them about their adoption story and about what their thoughts are on how the province can improve the adoption system. As you know, the ministry has announced this is one of the priorities to work on how we can enhance our adoption delivery system, and our goal is to ensure that as many MPPs as possible have a good understanding of the experiences of our adoptive families and some ideas that we have about how we can move forward. So I'm going to turn this over now to Kim, who's going to talk us through a PowerPoint slide. All of you will have an opportunity to have a copy of this PowerPoint after the workshop. And we're also, I'll just say this up front and I'll say it again at the end, we're here to help all of the families through their actual meetings, preparing for them, and we're hoping to hear from people after their meetings with their MPP. So without further ado, Kim, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you so much, Pat. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be able to do this with all of you. We have been doing legislative advocacy in the United States for some time now, and I've also been working in Ontario since 2006 through the Community Champions Network project that's funded by Jockey Bean Family. And I say both with admiration and also with a little bit of humor that one of the things that I talk about frequently with my Canadian partners and friends is that folks north of the United States seem to be much more polite than folks south of the United States. And so we frequently joke with one another about the fact that I'm going to try to help you still be polite, but be more, I guess, vocal and forceful in your requests with your MPPs. Here in the States, folks will call their senators or their representatives with any minor little issue and throw a little fit. Canada, my friends up in Canada, I would hope that you get to be a little bit more vocal. So the other thing I do want to say as I'm launching into these slides is that we also have two handouts that will be made available to you. One is some specific instruction around contacting your MPP, how you can write a letter, how you can send an email, some of the language that's most helpful to use as you're trying to get their attention. And the second is a communications tip handout or fact sheet that we've put together that just talks about the importance of language and the words that we use when we're trying to get our message across. So clearly, if I were going to have you walk away from listening or participating in this webinar tonight, I think the most important thing that I want you all to know, parents and youth, is that your voice does matter. You are the experts, and you can make a big difference, but you can only make a difference if you speak up, whether that's speaking verbally, literally speaking to your MPPs, or sending them in a story of your experience. Whatever it is that you can do, that you feel comfortable with doing, as long as you are communicating with your MPP, you are making a difference. The folks that you have elected into office cannot fix what's wrong unless they know about it. And truly, you know more about it than they do. The other thing that we know for a fact from research that's been done here in the States, and we've had legislators confirm this for us, is that when they hear from their constituents, they feel as though if they get even as few as 3 calls on a particular issue, they will then have their staffers look into that issue more. And if they get 10 calls, they feel as though there's a movement happening. So just imagine what the network that's connected with ACO can do if you get organized and start speaking up. So just thinking about what advocacy means. If we were doing this live, I would be throwing out the question, when you think of advocacy, what comes to mind? But just take a moment and think about in your life, whether it's with your children, at your job, on an important social justice issue. When you think of advocacy, what comes to mind? And some of the things that we commonly think of, number one, when you're advocating, you're educating. As I said in the previous slide, you folks are the experts on what kids need. Kids that have been in care, kids who are adopted, kids who are in families that are struggling to keep them safe and secure. In some respects, it's marketing. We want to put a improved face, but not just improved, but actually more true, more realistic face on who the children and the families are that we're talking about. We don't want folks to go with stereotypes, so we sort of need to rebrand foster care and adoption. We want to influence decision makers. We want them to think about every single action, every decision that they make in terms of what if it was their child? What would they want for their child? And when we can get our MPPs to think about their decisions and their funding in that way, we're going to get closer to getting what we need for each one of our children and all of our families. And that piece about communicating is really so important. So I do want to urge you after the webinar to take a look at the handouts that will be coming your way from the ACO. The communication style that you use, the way that you express yourself is really going to make a difference. And again, thinking about for yourself, who have you advocated for before? How have you advocated before? I can say without a hesitation that I know that every adoptive parent listening to this webinar has been a fierce advocate for their child, probably at the doctor's office, in school, out in the community. In fact, I dare say you probably all have had to do quite a bit of advocating just in order to be able to welcome your child into your family. You have talked to professionals, you have talked to doctors, you've talked to teachers, you have talked to folks in your community. And think about when you have done some advocacy work, what your results were. Think about what your challenges and your successes were, because what we want to do is to build on the successes that you've had and to learn from the challenges that you might have come across. So there's several key components when you think about advocacy. First of all is to really focus in on a topic. Now, when you're talking about personal or case advocacy on behalf of your child or your family, that can be pretty simple. But for this campaign that we're looking at for the month of November, for Adoption Awareness Month, we're talking about a class advocacy. Class advocacy is when a group of people get together, make a decision about what it is that they need to see change, and also make a commitment to work together to make that change. So the first important piece, of course, is to agree on what your issue is, what your topic is. It can be really, really powerful when you have a lot of people talking about the same thing at the same respect. It can be really confusing for the folks that you're trying to convince if people are going at it and having cross purposes or cross messages. When we have been able to do some of these advocacy preparation trainings here in the States before, and something that I would love to do in Ontario or other Canadian provinces, we'll bring folks together for a day of training, and part of that training is to hear a little bit from each one of the advocates about what their topic is or what their ask is, and to make sure that we've got something that's cohesive. It doesn't all have to be the exact same, but it has to weave together nicely. And that comes in your preparation. So you really want to build your message, you want to build your ask. You need to collect data that backs up what it is that you're talking about. So in the case of one of the November campaigns that we're going to be rolling out in November in Ontario, we're going to be talking about making sure that there is a centralized adoption agency or service so that families are not sort of running around in circles like that hamster in the cage. In order to make that ask really powerful, we want to have stories from families talking about the difficulty of bringing their children home perhaps, how long children have to wait when there's families waiting for them. And then we also need to be able to collect data that talks about the numbers of children, the numbers of families, the length of time in care. All of those data points are going to be important to make your ask. And then we want to think about who we need to influence. So there's a strategy around who are the key people, who are some of the connections to those key people, how do you leverage your personal associations, whether it's through your town or your faith community or your professional community, who do you know that can help get you in the door, and then finally what your follow-up is going to look like. When we think about that influencing, you really want to think about this idea of power mapping. And I find that this dartboard sort of illustration is so very illustrative of what it is that we have to think about. So right there in the center, policy commitment, that's whoever it is that can sign on the dotted line. It may be the minister themselves, it may be an MPP on a local issue, but that's the bottom line right there, the person who has the authority to say yay or nay. On the next circle out, that white circle, we have key decision makers. And when you think about the key decision makers, those are the folks that are in the room that are giving the vote, A or nay, the up or down vote. They're the next ones out. Individuals associated with the decision makers, those would be colleagues, they would be professional relationships and collaborations. They may be the wife or the husband or the partner of a key decision maker, if that partner has a strong voice. And then outside of that circle, the people that have the connections or the influence, and truly all of the parents and the youth that are going to be getting involved in the advocacy, you folks are folks that have connections. You have the most important connection. It is the connection to the real life experience, and that is an influence that you can leverage. So when you're thinking about whether it is that you are doing a phone call, an in-person meeting, a letter, or an email, there are several things that you want to make sure that you have crossed your T's and dotted your I's on. So the first thing is you need to identify yourself. You're going to want to let people know who you are, what riding you're in, maybe the exact neighborhood to give them a sense of where you are sort of in their riding. You want to also identify yourself in terms of your family. Who's in your family? What struggles may they have had? What is it about your family that makes you in a unique position to inform their decision making as they move forward? Maybe you also have connections in the school community, and you've seen kids and families coming through the school community. You really want to paint a nice picture of who you are and why it matters. You want to be very specific about what it is that you want them to understand, and you want to be concise, much more so than I'm being right now probably. But I know from the probably hundreds of meetings that I've had with legislators here in the States, they have limited time and they really want us to get to the point. So you want to be sure that you know what your point is and that you have gotten to it. You have to make the issue personal. You want to put them in the issue as a person, as another parent, as a sister or a brother, maybe of somebody who was adopted or someone who had special needs. One thing that I make sure that I do, especially if I'm having a meeting in person, I will look around the room for family pictures. And I will comment on the family pictures, especially pictures of children, right away and get the person I'm talking with to talk about those children. So that as I'm going back to my point, to my issue, I'm going to talk about their children. And I'm going to have them think about, what if it was your son? What if it was your daughter? What would you want for them? I always ask them if they have a personal connection to adoption, foster care, or kinship care. Did they stay with their grandparents during the summers? Did they have, an experience with an adopted cousin or sister or brother, someone in the community that they knew? so that they can put themselves, again, in the issue. You want to make sure that you're very confident about what you're saying, because you do, almost without exception, you are going to know more about the issue than they do. And you need to back up your position with facts. So it's very important that you, when you do meet with your MPP or when you communicate with them by letter or email, you want to make sure that you know that what you're saying is true. One of the most difficult things to do is to, make a statement and then later on have someone find out that it's wrong. One thing that I will say, though, is that if you are asked a question and you don't know the answer to the question, don't worry about that. That's actually an opportunity. If they've asked you, especially about data or about facts, your response always should be, I don't really know that for sure. I don't want to give you false information, but let me find out about that and let me get back to you. The reason why that's great is that, number one, you are starting to build yourself as the expert. So you're going to be a person that they may come back to again and again. But also, when you go back to them, it gives you a chance again to underscore what your issue is and what your ask is. And you always want to be very prompt with your follow-up. I always recommend that folks, after your meeting, within 24 hours, send a quick email. Thank you so much for meeting with me. I just want to reiterate a couple of the points that were made. If there was some follow-up that you were going to do or that they were going to do, I want you to include that in your communication with them, and keep that communication going back and forth. Another thing that I always do with my follow-ups is I let the person I've spoken to, whether it's the aide or the MPP, or in my case, my senator or my representative, I let them know that I'm also available for them to reach out to if they have questions or if they have constituents that have needs. It's a wonderful way, again, to build that relationship. There are many ways that you can be in touch. You can make in-person visits. You can do phone calls. You can do emails. In the United States, we can't really do snail mail much anymore because of that awful anthrax scare that we had several years back. So we never do snail mail, but I do believe in Ontario that's still a great way to communicate. And quite honestly, I think it's lovely to get actual mail, and I think a lot of other people do too. Op-eds and letters to the editor are a great avenue. And I would encourage you to think not just about the Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star, but your local newspapers are always looking for community news. So even if you're having trouble getting printed in one of the larger newspapers, you can easily get reprinted in one of your local community papers. And then there's just community advocacy. Maybe you're going to make a trip to the YMCA and talk to whoever's in charge of children's programs. Do you know that you have a community of foster or adopted kids here? Is there a way that you reach out to those kids and their families? You can do community advocacy with local sports teams. We often will go to some of the, what are they called, the big animal clubs, the Elks, the Lions, and such, and just ask them if they're aware of the need in the community and if they've thought about how they can contribute. So I want to talk a little bit again about some of the power of advocacy. Having constituents, youth and parents, tell their own stories really empowers those speakers, the youth and the parents, and it gives them a capacity and a knowledge that they can be involved. So there's really a benefit to the individual just in doing the advocacy itself, in terms of personal growth, in terms of sort of self-confidence. And also for myself, I found it really helps me wrap my head around what's the real issue. And it forces me to be very deliberate and very thoughtful about what it is that I want to ask and what it is that I want to accomplish. For the people you're speaking to, whether you're talking to a staffer or the MPP, you are providing them with a huge service. They are hearing from you, the experts, and it gives them a much deeper understanding and a much deeper empathy for the issue you're talking about. And in response, it also gives you an opportunity to understand more about the policy process as they're communicating with you and having a conversation and sort of brainstorming about what can we do about this issue. You certainly are going to get the staff engaged very quickly, and I've seen them get motivated to act in such an amazing way. For a lot of our legislators, for a lot of our folks in those elected positions, they spend much of their time sitting in rooms talking with each other and talking with policy wonks, those folks that just sort of are in the ivory castle thinking all the time. When you've got real life people in front of you talking about real live experiences and talking about real children who need our support and need our advocacy, you absolutely can touch their heart and you can motivate them to get active. I was in a meeting one day with a woman who was talking to a senatorial aide, and she runs a program that was about to be defunded. We met in September. Her first question to him was to ask if he had any experience with kinship care. And he brightened up and shared a story about the fact that his cousin grew up in his family. His mom was her guardian and cared for her entire growing up years. So he really could jump right into the issue. So Doris, who I was sitting with, who was the constituent talking to him, had a little conversation about her own experience with being a kinship care provider for her niece and nephew. So, you've got that really nice mutual connection. And then in the course of the conversation, she shared with this aide that the program that she ran that was servicing kinship providers, kinship families throughout New Jersey was at risk of losing their funding at the end of December. And as we were closing the meeting, the aide said to Doris, I want you to write me a letter, tell me exactly what you need for funding, what the programs are. I'm going to hand deliver it to the senator and ask him what he can do to find funding for you, because that's an incredibly important project that you're doing, and I believe in it 100% and will convince him as well. Pretty significant piece that was happening right then and there. So the other thing people frequently ask is, okay, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell my story, but what is it that I'm going to ask the MPP for? And this is really just a laundry list of the different ways that advocacy can work on a fix. You could go in and you could ask for a new bill or a new policy. That's kind of a very high level ask. It's not out of the question. It certainly has happened. But it's a big lift, and I think there are a lot of other things that you can do. You could ask for legislative language that will help explain to the folks that are actually implementing the policy or the practice how it is that the legislature, that the ministry is wanting them to implement it. So, for example, you may know that the CAS is carrying out a policy in some way that is not exactly the way you understand that the ministry had wanted it to happen. And so what you can do is go in and talk to the ministry, talk to the MPP, explain to them where the miscommunication or the shift has happened, and ask if they can send some guidance or some language to help the CAS understand what it is they actually wanted to do. You can ask for an amendment to a current bill that's out there. You can ask for them to increase the public's knowledge about a bill so that the public knows what their role is in making sure that that bill or that policy is adhered to properly. You can talk to the legislature about where can we find the money to increase a project, to sustain a project, or to develop a project that's going to help support our families. You can inform the public. That's often done through op-eds and letters to the editor, or even just if you can find a reporter that is willing to do a column on a piece. But just informing the public sometimes can make a huge difference. I know that there has been quite a bit of activity in Ontario around informing the school systems about what it's like for kids in school. another great piece of advocacy. As I talked about earlier, you can have influence on a particular case by letting someone know about something that's happening and seeing if they can help move a piece along. You can ask for an evaluation or a study request or a program review of a program that is either working really well that you would like to see expanded and replicated, or a program that you're pretty sure is not working the way that it should be, and you want to make sure that there's some accountability. And certainly media exposure has a great impact on what the public is going to do. But media exposure also can have a great impact on what your MPP is going to do. So for example, if you know that your MPP has come out publicly saying that they're in favor of something, and you would like to see some more attention paid to that piece that they're in favor of, maybe the media calling them out could make a difference. I can tell you a real quick story. In Massachusetts several years ago, we were trying to get funding for post-adoption services. And we got an amendment put into, for us it's called the Ways and Means Committee. We got an amendment put in to get a program started. We also got a secondary amendment put in to get the funding for that program. And then we found out that the senator who was making the majority of the decisions around funding was not in favor of funding this program, this post-adoption program. And so we had a group of folks that had committed to being on a telephone tree to make phone calls, and we had about 10 constituents of this particular senator who were all lined up to make calls. And at about 9 o'clock on the morning, the day before the final decision had to be made, one of the constituents called, got the aide on the phone, and said, I understand that Senator Haley is not in favor of the post-adoption money that we have asked for. And the aide said, well, you know, there's an awful lot of competing priorities, and we can't always do what everybody wants, but I'll be sure to let the senator know that you called. So that person hung up. About 15, 20 minutes later, the next person, having spoken to the first person, the next person calls and says, I've been told that Senator Haley is not going to support the post-adoption money, and I am just appalled. I have always voted for him, and I've always known him as a man who cared about children and families, but clearly I was incorrect about his priorities. I'm going to have to rethink my vote next term. And the aide said, well, I don't think he's made any decisions yet. I think that you're jumping the gun. We're going to have to look into that. Let me take your name and number, and I'll get back to you. And about a half an hour after that, a third person called and said, I understand that Senator Haley is not committed to supporting the post-adoption funding and the post-adoption language. And the aide said, just a minute, let me get Senator Haley on the phone. And Senator Haley got on the phone and said, I don't know how these rumors get started. Of course I'm in favor of that. You've known me for years. You know that I am strongly in favor of children and families. And the third caller happened to be the wife of a man that wrote for a local newspaper where Senator Haley, that was in his district. And she said, well, I'm so pleased to hear that. I'm going to let Bill know immediately that he should be putting something in the paper letting folks know what a strong supporter and advocate you are. And so, needless to say, once that happened, Senator Haley couldn't back down and the money passed. So relationship building. I was very lucky when I was first getting involved in doing any kind of advocacy work that I had a great mentor who taught me so much about the importance of the relationship. One of the things that I had not realized, and I can't emphasize it strongly enough with folks, is that engaging with the staff is actually more important than engaging with the MPP, if it's anything like the states. But the staff, they are on board for that MPP because they are the ones that bring the MPP the information that he or she needs to make a decision. They are also the folks that kind of control The door. If the door is going to be opened or closed, you're going through that staff first. They're the gatekeeper. So you really want to engage with them and you want to build a relationship with them. You want to be in regular contact with the office. One of the things that we learned the hard way in a number of different places is that the legislators and their aides and their staff get kind of tired of only hearing from people that have, as they call it, have their hands out. So you want to contact them at other times. I just wanted to let you know about this great thing that's happened in your riding. You might not know, and it's always nice to share good news. Or I just wanted to thank you for the decision you made on X, Y, or Z. That was really a great decision, and you just need to know that your constituents appreciate it. Or I just want you to know that the support group that I lead is here and available for other families. If you know of people that need it, please let us know. So you, in doing that, you are becoming that point person. You are the person who they are going to call when they want information about adoption or foster care or child welfare in general. In that way, you're going to be able to continually impact and influence the way that they make decisions. In fact, one of the advocates that I know here in the States that I know Pat Convery has met is Lori Ross, and she lives in Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri. She began as just, a parent advocate like you and me, and over the course of 15 years has been so present and so available and so knowledgeable about child welfare issues that the legislature in Missouri does not pass any child welfare related legislation, statute, bill, policy, anything in her to say, are there any negative consequences we haven't thought of yet? Now, that doesn't mean that she gets to say what happens in the whole state of Missouri, but they at least touch base with her because they know that she's fair-minded. They know that she is not talking to them just for her own purposes and for her agency's good fortune, but that she is really trying to inform them to do the best job they possibly can. One of the questions that I think is very important to ask, especially for folks that might be working in the public domain or for folks that might be receiving any kind of public funds in order to do your advocacy or your support work, is what the difference is between educating and lobbying. This is a huge issue in the States, and if it's not a huge issue for you in Ontario, I apologize, but I think it is a good point to go over. They are essentially the exact same thing with just two different changes. So, educating and lobbying are all about communicating on the issues, talking about the successes, the need for services, the unmet demand for services, and sharing personal experiences. The only two differences are the specific legislative language and a request for money. So if there's a bill that's pending and you are speaking to your MPP about that bill, or if there's a bill that you would like them to write or a bill that you would like them not to support, and you talk to them about that specific bill, that's now lobbying. Or if you are asking them to fund a particular item, you are lobbying. So those are the only two things that make it lobbying. Other than that, you are welcome to talk to your MPP about virtually anything. I'm going to just one more piece, and then I want to turn it over to Pat to talk more about what she has in mind and what ACO has in mind for the coming month in November. But I also want to open it up to questions for folks. And if you have questions, what you should do is type them into the question and answer box, and we will get them answered as well as we can. So, as a Canadian, as a citizen, as an Ontarian, you have a right to express your views. And your MPPs expect you to express them. I would say that if I were going to say the one thing that I could point my finger at in terms of MPPs or other legislators being lazy, it's not so much that they're being lazy as the fact that they're not hearing from us enough. So don't think that you don't have the opportunity or the right. You do. And the fact that they don't hear from enough people means that a pretty small outcry is going to make a huge difference, because it could be the only outcry that they're hearing, other than the folks that have some kind of sort of financial, professional, personal gain. Lobbyists are always talking to the legislators, but regular citizens don't as much. And in fact, in some respects, I think it's not just what you have the right to do, but I do believe it's also our responsibility to speak up and to be heard, especially in terms of talking on behalf of our children and the families that we represent. And then as an adult, as an educator, as a parent, as a student, as an advocate, or as a youth who is in foster care or has been adopted, you have a very unique, very valuable expertise to share. There is no one who hasn't lived it that can speak to the issues the way that you can. And you can talk about not just what isn't working and what needs to be fixed, but you can also elevate for them what is working and what should be spread, and how we can do the best job possible for the kids and families in Ontario. The problem is that if you don't speak up, it's really possible for the MPPs to make decisions that are not well informed. If they're only hearing from people who have some kind of a financial stake or some kind of a programmatic stake, they may not be hearing all the information that they need. So they really do. They need to hear from us, and they need to hear from us often. So I'm sorry, Pat, I think I have one more line here.
Yep.
So definitely as you're preparing, you want to know your message and prepare your main points. I really encourage you to practice your 2-minute elevator speech. You want to be able to hit the high points right away. It's always great to bring with you sort of a one-page informational piece. And I believe that Adoption Council of Ontario is going to be putting together some of that to work with folks. You want to personalize whatever you're going to leave. You're going to want to make sure that you have asked them if they have a personal connection. You want to meet with their staff whenever possible. That is great. It's always nice to do that. At the same token, if you have the opportunity to meet your MPP, ask for a photo. Use it in your newsletter. Use it in a communication maybe with your local paper. So, put it out there that adoptive families are meeting with the MPPs. Put it out there that the MPPs want to listen to what adoptive families have to say. And always take note of what you want to do next. Make sure that you have an opportunity to follow up. Make sure that you send a thank you afterwards. And make sure that they know that they're going to continue to hear from you on a regular basis. And with that, I do want to turn it over to Pat.
Okay, thank you so much, Kim. That was really clear, concise, and a lot of really helpful information. So let me just talk now a little bit about specifically kind of the ask in Ontario. And certainly we are encouraging families to tell what their lived experience has been and let their MPPs know what they think changes that can be made. There's many different ways that we can improve and enhance our system, so it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. I was actually on the call today with the program manager at the Child Welfare Secretariat for one of our programs, just talking, and a comment that he made was encouraging in light of us having this webinar tonight, because he did say, oh, Pat, the government is interested in adoption. So I thought, okay, well, we're going to be testing that out during Adoption Awareness Month. Certainly what we have here is some of the things that we've identified as being items that consistently come across us as areas where we can improve our service. We do know that in 2009 there was a report done by an expert panel on infertility and adoption, and in that report there was a recommendation to centralize adoption services so that there would be a more streamlined, a more effective, a more supportive way of helping families navigate into and through our adoption system, becoming adopt-ready, and also connecting with the children who are waiting for adoption within our province, as well as making sure that families have the information they need to make informed decisions about all of the adoption choices, how they get ready, and which stream. You know, in Ontario we have international, private, and our public adoption system. And these are things that you have learned a lot about through your work and through your journey so far, but very few MPPs have an understanding of all of these. So understanding that the need to centralize these to make it a more effective journey for adoptive families to connecting with children who are waiting, I think is a big important piece. The third point here, we consistently hear messages that we're on it, but we still are seeing that the same barriers exist. So we do want to perhaps explain what the challenges have been and the barriers that still continue to thwart the efforts of families to navigate through the system. Certainly enhancing our delivery is one piece, but as well the fact that we know that adoptive families are interested, we know that families in Ontario in general are interested in adopting, and we want them to be welcome and valued. We want them to become adopt-ready effectively, and we want them to have the supports in the long term, particularly when we're connecting with the many children that we know are waiting. So that's kind of the streamlined view. I want to talk, I'm not sure, is there another, I don't think there's another, Kim, is there another slide after this? Because I just wanted to briefly now, okay, so before we get into questions, I just wanted to briefly talk a little bit about sort of the more general points of our ask. So you know that the tagline for the Adoption Council of Ontario is kids need families and families need support. And I think at the high level, that is the message. We know that there are many, many children who need to have a family in our foster care system and throughout the world. We also know that families who adopt children, particularly when children have had experiences of trauma and loss, that those families are going to need support on the lifelong journey. Some of the ways that we're going to help you, as Kim mentioned, we're going to send you these handouts. We do have a case for support document that we have created for the Adoption Awareness Month. So this is where you're going to have the stats of how many children are in our foster care system, stats that we know in terms of the needs that families have, and some information that will help you in presenting this material to the MPPs. We're going to be mailing that directly to every MPP, but also to you if you identify to us ahead of time that you're going to be having a meeting with your MPP or with even a local community agency, your educators, or possibly with your newspaper or your radio. So we'll send you a couple of copies of that document as well so that you have it. We'll be sending you a link to the video, A Family Effect, which is we created this in 2015 for Adoption Awareness Month. It's a short video that is really quite powerful. I think most of you probably have seen it, but we'll certainly welcome anyone and even people in other provinces to share this video, because in the 1 minute of this video, it really does talk to a lot of the issues that we're identifying. In terms of some of the things that you can do, I just want to mention, of course, we've talked a lot today about making the call and meeting with your MPP, and knowing that your MPP, we hope, would be expecting this because it is Adoption Awareness Month, so it is okay to push a little bit harder. We also have some surveys, and you'll be getting the links to those surveys in our probably several times, but certainly in the email after this. We've created 2 surveys, one for waiting parents, one for families who have adopted, where you can collectively give information, a lot of questions, but it's really about us to get an accurate and update measure of how far have we come, really since 2009 when we really identified the barriers, and what are the things that families are still wanting to need. We'll be creating these surveys, the information from these surveys, into one-pagers and distributing them as we can. So if you were going to a meeting at any point in time, please get in touch with us and we can give you an updated version of what we know so far. We'll probably keep them alive most of the month of November because we want to have as far-reaching an impact as we can and get as much information as we can. We mentioned that you can write stories, so certainly any written stories that you have, we're happy to have them. Adopt for Life during the Adoption Awareness Month posts stories very regularly, and we will be doing a number of blogs during Adoption Awareness Month, so we're happy to have your information. As well, following us on social media and using your own social media avenues, Facebook, Twitter, and a short story on that I remember several years ago when Kathleen Wynne was not even a name in most people's repertoires. One of our adoptive families, we did a similar thing where we had some stories. We sent them out to all the MPPs and we asked families to reach out to their MPPs. And one of our adopted parents reached out to Kathleen Wynne, who was the first MPP in the province, to call him back and say, come on in, let's have a meeting. And the next day there was a picture on Twitter and a picture on Facebook, and it was on her page. So that picture alone, I think, they're getting a lot of good press about it, and I think it's really an important way to raise these issues. Certainly in terms of mail-outs, I mentioned we will be mailing the Case for Support. We're also going to ask any families who have attended the Pathways program, we're going to reach out separately to all of those families who have registered with us with their permission, and send them a copy of a letter that they can personalize and send to MPPs that would be basically a thank you to the ministry for funding the Pathways program. And that's a way of us honoring and celebrating the fact that we have moved forward certainly a little bit further along the line of supports. So we want to congratulate them for what they have done while we also challenge them on what more we can do. So that's kind of the nutshell of the plans that we have. We have identified our parent liaison, Sylvia Gibbons, who is happy to talk individually with any families. And again, the materials that we'll send out to people will have the info@adoption.on.ca as well as Sylvia's email. And we're happy at any point in time, any of us on staff, if people have a specific thing that you want to talk about or a part of your story that you're not sure how to present, or if in meeting with your MPP or the media or anybody in the follow-up after, you have some questions or you want to just have somebody else to kind of give you some guidance or some thoughts. We don't know all the answers, but sometimes just talking to someone else is a way of us sort of supporting through to the message. Finally, I just want to say I don't think we need to be worried about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. I think Kim said it right in the beginning. Generally Canadians are shy. We're not used to kind of making a lot of noise, and sometimes we don't have the confidence to really say that clear message. But the experts are the people who are going to be reaching out, and that's why we really want the adoptive families, families who are waiting to adopt, and people who have been adopted. So the members of our adoption community to reach out and tell their story and really feel confident that they have a voice that needs to be heard during this month and all year. But again, as always, we hope that we can really do as much as we can in the month of November when people are expecting to hear more about adoption, and we can play it forward as we move forward into Family Day in February, into Child and Youth and Care Day in May, and other events along the way. So that's sort of the conclusion, I think, of the formal part of our presentation. What we'd like to do now is turn it over to any questions. And as Kim mentioned, if you type your question into the little box there at the bottom, into the chat box, then Wendy is online and she's going to help us process through them, and you can direct your questions at Kim or to me, or even just make comments if you would like to share a comment at this point with those of us who are on this line.
I also want to say, if you think of questions later, or you have any kind of specific ask, or even want to write up your story or your letter or whatever for the MPPs, or an op-ed or a letter to the editor and you want to send it to me, you've got my email address here. I'm also happy to help review and to help you put your thing together. As a single awaiting parent, it has been a much more difficult journey. Are there any additional resource materials that we could use in our presentation?
That's a very good question. So now that you've identified that, I think that we can look at and get in touch with you directly on some, because that is definitely, I think, and as an example, I think that our some of the supports that our government has put in place relative to, for example, the targeted subsidies, which have an income cap, and part of their feeling is that single parents or parents, even two parents where maybe one parent is going to be staying home, that's going to be more effective. So I think that the part that's helpful for MPPs to understand is what the experience as a single parent you've had. So the skills that you bring, because as a single parent, you bring certain skills to parenting and other parts of your life, and certainly an ability to give attention to a child, preparedness for bringing a child into your family, and as well, ability to really know how important a child's going to be to you personally. And I really think it's important that helping an MPP to understand what that experience has been like for you, but also the strengths that you bring to an adoption. As particularly, you mentioned that you're a waiting family. I think, and the barriers, but also the opportunity and strengths. Some of what we're doing in Adoption Awareness Month is breaking down a lot of myths. And we know that a lot of the people who aren't in this field, we all had them before we got on adoption journeys, that, we have some stereotypic ideas about who the children are and who the families who want to adopt are. So it's really important for us to take the time to explain your situation, how you've experienced it, and also feel really confident again in bringing what you're bringing to the experience of wanting to be an adoptive parent. I think that's where the information on the surveys is going to be really helpful too. We've given a lot of room on the surveys for people to make their comments, and again, because it's going to be non-identifying, that's going to be really helpful. The more people who fill out the surveys, the more we can give corroborating material and information to support the stories that we know families have to tell.
Indeed. Well, I see no additional questions, and I am guessing that people have had an awful long workday already and are getting ready to turn it in. Just want to reiterate that Pat and I are both available. Please do send questions our way, and please look for materials coming your way. We want to make sure that we support you to make it the very best advocacy-laden November Adoption Awareness Month in Ontario yet. And also want to thank you very much for your time and attention tonight.